Welcome into the PFF NFL Show. Steve Palazzolo back in here with Sam Monson. Hello to our YouTube watchers. If you guys are just listening, you guys can also check us out on YouTube now because we are recording every single podcast. Sam, it's draft time again. We're back to the draft. We did a lot of NFL stuff, a lot of free agency on the last couple pods, but we're back to draft discussion. You fired up or what?
Yeah, we spent all week running through draft profiles for the update of the PFF draft guide, which you Edge and Elite users should have in your tools already. There will be an update. We've got more draft profiles coming. We've got more data guys, more everything. So we've been hip deep in the draft this week.
And, of course, the QB Annual got its update. I am giddy with the way it came out, our new accuracy charting. So go check that out if you have Edge or Elite. It is all updated in your dashboard. A lot of draft stuff going on for us, too. We did our SI shoot a couple weeks ago. A lot of that stuff starting to come out as well. Today, I think I really want to focus on position by position, some of the strengths and weaknesses of the draft. I think this is a good way to kind of connect what we're seeing from an evaluation standpoint and what fans can expect as far as, what their team needs. If your team needs an edge defender, what are we looking at in this entire class? So we're going to go through the strengths and weaknesses of the draft class, piggybacking on a piece I wrote on the site this week. We'll hit up our draft news a little bit. It's pro day time, Sam.
Yeah.
And it's been QB pro day week from Josh Allen to Sam Darnold to Josh Rosen. So we'll discuss pro days and just see where that leads us. We'll just see where that leads us right now. So Maurice Hurst news to cover. And at some point I want to get to the piece that you wrote on Saquon Barkley. I think it was a really nice breakdown of his strengths and weaknesses in the piece that I wrote on Lamar Jackson. We'll get to some players that we're high on and low on. So we got all sorts of fun stuff today, segments just to make our friend Mike Renner proud while he's on secret assignment. All right, let's get into the strengths and weaknesses of the draft. I wrote this up this week, and again, just trying to find a way to say, okay, if you're looking for a guy in the top end, in the first round perhaps, where does that position group land? And then if you're looking for a guy later on, is there depth? Is there any depth to the class? So let's start with the quarterback position. I slotted this in as strong just because, especially at the top. I think there's a lot of first-round prospects here. Is that a fair assessment of the quarterback class?
Yeah, I mean, there's 6 guys that we're all talking about as being potential or even likely first-rounders. And then there's a couple of guys after that as well that, we expect maybe in the conversation to be day 2, second- and third-round quarterbacks that are still viable. So, yeah, that's a pretty good top end of the group.
Yeah, with quarterback, it really is a lot of yes or no, right? Yes, he's a first-round pick. No, he's not. So when it comes to depth, I called it average depth just because there's a couple of those intriguing day 2 type of guys. But, yeah, I think as many as 6 guys could go in the first. I think ultimately Mason Rudolph probably doesn't go in the first. I don't know if the NFL likes him enough for that to happen. The NFL does like Josh Allen enough for him to go in the first, and we don't hate that, but they like him enough for that to happen.
They do. Yeah. I was saying to you today at lunchtime, it's very difficult to talk anybody, any football guy away, talk them down from the ledge of just the measurables, the tools, the arm. Yeah. As soon as Josh Allen goes out there and throws a ball, they're sold. It doesn't matter where that ball goes. Just seeing him fire a ball deep downfield, they buy in immediately. And it's really difficult to talk them down off the ledge of that and go, yeah, but, let's just caution it a little bit because there's quite a bit of inaccuracy here. There's a lot not to like as well.
Even at the pro day, which we will get to in a little bit. So quarterback, we've talked about them quite a bit. Go check out our quarterback episode. We did go QB by QB, but definitely strong at the top. Let's go to running back now. If you are looking for running back, I do think this is one of the stories of the draft because Saquon Barkley seems like he's the guy that's just sitting atop everybody's running back draft board. And the top end of the running back class, I called it strong, but also the depth in the running back class, I also called it strong. This has been a consistent trend, I'd say, the last 2 years where there's been some really good depth at the class. So the storyline is, do you really want to take Saquon Barkley at the top? Even if he is special, do you really want to take him at the top because it's a deep draft? So we'll talk about Barkley a little bit later in more specifics when we break down your article, but what are your thoughts on, the first-round guys versus the depth in this class?
Yeah, I think this is a great running back class. I think the top of it is fantastic. I mean, everybody has Saquon Barkley and then everybody else. I think that's probably the right way of going. But even if you just look at the next group of guys, so once you get past Saquon Barkley, you've got Rashad Penny, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, Darius Geis, Ronald Jones. Those are 5 more guys, all of whom are pretty top-quality players. You've got a guy like Royce Freeman from Oregon as well following them up, could easily be in that conversation. You have a bunch more guys that could still be legit every down quality running backs making an impact early. And then that's before you get to the true depth players, players in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round who can all come in and make a major impact on an offense, albeit maybe on a more situational level or as more of a running back by committee. But this is one of the strongest running back groups I can remember seeing overall. I think it's a fantastic time to need a running back, almost regardless of what type you need.
Yeah, I'm looking at our horizontal board right here where we slot everybody, stack them up where we would draft them. We have a bunch of guys in the 2nd round range, a bunch of guys in the 3rd round range. Now, when it comes to draft time, a lot of those guys do fall to the 3rd and 4th round, and that's why, from a talent standpoint, there may be 2nd round players. From an NFL value standpoint, you might be able to get them much later, and that's why every year it's like, where'd this guy come from? 4th round running back, 5th round running back who's been pretty productive, because a lot of times you could find a good one later in the draft.
Yeah, well, a lot of that is this conversation we keep bringing up is the inherent positional value of running backs. Are these guys valuable enough to take high in the draft anymore, or is it a position that you can fill later on and therefore don't want to invest in? So even though these guys in isolation are talented enough that they're worth 1st round picks, if you just don't think the position is worth that much of an investment, you pick them in the 2nd or the 3rd round. It doesn't change their talent level. It just changes how much you're willing to invest in.
Positional value. I keep getting talked away from running backs the more and more we talk to our friends over at the PFF Forecast. Eric Eager and George Shahuri is his name. Shahuri. It's close.
Yeah,
it's close enough.
It's getting there.
All right, wide receivers. This has been a fun Twitter discussion with some of the other guys, Matt Harmon from NFL.com and some other guys that are ranking wide receivers, and nobody wants to put a top 5 together in this class. Previous classes, you've got some clear top 3 guys, and you just kind of sort those guys. Last year, I felt really good about John Ross and Mike Williams and Corey Davis up at the top. In this class, it's a bunch of guys I want to rank 5th in the class. That's how so I called it weak at the top, but good depth, strong depth in this wide receiver class. There's just no clear number 1 guy in this class.
What was the other line you had? It's like 10,000 twos when all you need is a 1.
Yes, that's right.
That's what it is.
Songs in your head now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it really is. I mean, and that's okay. Again, in today's NFL, you'd love to have that number 1 wide receiver. But I think there's a ton of value in the number 2 guy. And it's a lot of 31 flavors type of deal. Do you want a deep threat? Do you want a 6'4" guy? Do you want a slot guy? There's a lot of different
So that's
styles.
The thing with this number 1, number 2 stuff is that, in an ideal world, everybody wants the Randy Moss, the guy that is the unquestioned number 1, can do everything you need him to do, and, is a Hall of Famer. That's pretty good. That's the dream scenario with your top wide receiver. But in today's NFL, it's as much about roles and, position or the different types of wide receivers and just having a balanced receiving core more than it is necessarily about having a guy who's number 1 and then a number 2 guy who does all the same things as number 1, just not as well, and then your slot guy. If you just get a guy, say you're the Philadelphia Eagles and all you needed was a replacement for Torrey Smith. You needed the deep threat that can take the top off a defense. You already have the slot weapon in terms of Nelson Aguilar. You've already got the more possession, contested catch kind of wide receiver. All you needed was the deep threat, a better version of Torrey Smith. Now, they went out and signed Mike Wallace, so that's exactly what they did. They replaced deep threat with deep threat.
They got Mac Hollins already there for a deep threat as well.
But there are teams that are going to be rolling into the draft with that same idea. They don't necessarily need a true number 1 wide receiver. They just need a guy to fill a specific role within that offense to avoid defenses playing them in a certain way. To take the top off a defense, to make them respect the deep ball, and back off the secondary. There's a bunch of guys in this group that are a specific type. They are, I don't want to say one-trick pony or one-dimensional, but they lean a certain way stylistically, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It might be the perfect fit for an offense that needs one of those types of players.
DJ Chark from LSU, a guy I was watching again today who fits that deep threat mold. So, again, a lot of these guys are either the deep threat. There's a bunch of 6'4" receivers who I just keep typing the same thing in our reports. Red zone threat, doesn't really separate, body control. A few guys that can play the slot, play outside. So I think that's where we are with this class. The one guy that does stand out, I know Calvin Ridley's getting a ton of hype as far as being the clear-cut number one, but Cortland Sutton out of SMU, because he's 6'3", and he ran that crazy three-cone, and that shiftiness shows up on the field, that quickness in and out of routes for a guy that big. If there's one guy I would say could elevate himself to that number one type of status, maybe him, maybe DJ Moore, who's gotten a lot of hype out of Maryland, 6 feet, who can just get speed and quickness. So, but just not that clear guy in this one.
Yeah, DJ Moore, got to stop letting the ball hit him in the face, though. You
were so angry at him today watching him.
Well, look, there's drops and there's drops, If I'm okay to an extent with here's the ball, it just drops out of the hands, right? When the ball comes here and it physically hits you in the face after you dropped it, that's a special level of drop that should be counted. Should be double counted is what it should be. When you're counting up, when you're tallying the drops at the end of the season,
the ones
that hit you in
the
face after you've dropped them should be counted twice.
We might have to Instagram that. I just need more specifics on what that looks like.
The point I brought up to you before is that I watched pretty much all of Troy Williamson's career, and all of his drops, he got hit in the face once by the ball. Now, if you've done that twice in a season, that's not good.
Don't put that on DJ Moore.
Just saying.
I like DJ Moore.
You need to stop letting the ball hit you in the face.
Don't put that on him. All right, tight end. I went strong at the top and strong as far as depth goes. The resounding theme for the tight end class, though, is good receiver, needs work blocking, and I just think this might be every year coming out of college. Yeah. So that's what it is. So there's a lot of guys. I had to write those really nice, I didn't write willing blocker because I hate it, but there's some guys who it's like you could see they're like, I'm really trying to mix it up and get in there. I just can't do it.
But here's the thing. Even good college blocking tight ends need work to be blockers in the NFL. That was supposed to be one of O.J. Howard's strengths last year, and he wasn't a good blocker in the NFL to begin with. It takes, there's a different level of blocking NFL guys, particularly if you have a reputation as a guy who can block, because then you're being assigned the defensive end. You're not even getting the linebacker or the defensive back. You've got to block the D end who's 275 pounds trying to come through you. That's rough going. So if you're not even if you've never been asked to block before, you've got no shot.
And we've said this before too, how difficult some of the assignments are in the NFL.
Yeah,
where they'll have you blocking a 6 technique who's just straight up in front of you, and you're running, and he has the angle to run away from you essentially, and you have to try to cut him off. I mean, some of the blocks they ask tight ends to make at the NFL level are very difficult, especially if you do have that reputation as a guy that can handle defensive ends.
You're being asked to make tackle blocks essentially, which against NFL defensive ends. So that's rough going.
But just off the top of my head, as I'm looking through this, Troy Fumagalli from Wisconsin, pretty solid blocker. He's gotten better through the years. Hayden Hurst out of South Carolina, can get in the way of guys on the move. That's what a lot of these guys do, at least get in the way when they're blocking on the move. Other guys just get completely whooped right off the line of scrimmage. But I think the key here, it's Dallas Goedert, potential first-round pick out of South Dakota State. Mark Andrews, another shifty slot receiver type of guy that can be a mismatch weapon. Hurst, who I mentioned, out of South Carolina. Mike Gesicki, who just dominated the combine. So there are some very good mismatch type of weapons at tight end in this class. So I think you can maybe get Goddard in the first, but I think there are guys up and down the rest of the draft where you can maybe pick up some useful players.
Yeah, it's interesting. The league has been trending for years now with these mismatch players, both at tight end, with running backs as well. That's part of why Saquon is so good as a prospect, is that he's one of those mismatch players in the passing game. And it's taken football a while to catch up on the defensive side. That's why Tyrann Mathieu, say, was such a fantastic player, is because he's that matchup weapon on defense. This is the first year I can remember where you're starting to see multiple players on the defensive side come out, and you're saying, well, this guy's a potential matchup weapon on defense. There's a bunch of guys that are kind of crossover safety corners, I think, that fit that role, and there's a few of those safety linebackers as well that maybe in the past those guys would have been referred to as tweeners, and you would have had a problem as to where to play them. Now you're looking at these guys and you're saying, well, this is a potential coverage matchup player. This is a guy that can take away an athletic tight end in the passing game, and you might actually have a shot of slowing down Rob Gronkowski.
Yeah, and look, I really think last year we saw offense take a bit of a step back, and I think a lot of it was because there was some quarterback injuries, and Rodgers was hurt, and Luck missed the season, and all that stuff was a factor. Wentz getting hurt down the stretch, but I do think defenses started to catch up a little bit to offenses, and I think it was because of the last couple drafts where we saw a lot more versatile defensive backs come into the league, guys that can do more. And I do think we're starting to just see them in a different light. Even some of the scouting reports that I've written up on safeties this year, it's like this guy could play free safety and cover the slot. This guy might just be able to cover tight ends. And we are just kind of looking at him through that lens, I think, a little bit more. I think there is a lot more defensive talent entering the league these last couple of years. And I think that's why we're starting to see the defenses get a little bit back into the game after the offense was just trending up year over year until last season.
I think the other thing there is that we're starting to see more of these guys in the NFL in the first place, so there's an easier roadmap to how these guys can be successful. You can now see, you can use a Tyrann Mathieu. You can see how you deploy that guy and get the best use of him, or a Micah Hyde, or there's now an
Jones
obvious
is one.
there's now an obvious route to some of these guys playing in a more unconventional way. Whereas before it was, well, how do I get this guy in the field when he can't do this, this, and this?
Right. No, that makes sense. Let's go O-line. Last year at this time, I believe we only had one offensive tackle that we declared as a first-round caliber player. That was Ryan Ramczyk. Ultimately, there were Garrett Bowles goes in the first, Ramczyk goes in the first, but it was really this weak tackle class. This year looks a little bit better. I think it's even stronger on the interior. We'll talk about that in a second. The tackle class is a little weird, I think, though, because you've got Mike McGlinchey at the top, Connor Williams at the top. I like both of those guys. They're our top two potential first-round tackles. McGlinchey, though, we've debated Nate Solder quite a bit. Like, Solder's this really good run blocker, but is he this elite pass protector? Is he worth all this money? I feel like McGlinchey kind of has those same question marks, which is a little scary.
Yeah.
But he's capable. And then Connor Williams, some people think he should move to guard, but his production's outstanding, movement skills, all that stuff. So it's a couple tackles that we feel good about, that they're good players, but are they those lockdown elite pass protectors? Not really sure.
And then there's some guys lower down this draft that are phenomenal athletes, but we don't know if they're actually any good as tackles.
Colton Miller at UCLA, Brian O'Neill at Pittsburgh, your developmental guys. So your developmental offensive tackles, and then guys that are bad athletes but are massive, like Orlando Brown.
Very massive.
Yeah, so Jamarco Jones, maybe developmental offensive tackle as well out of Ohio State.
You've also got to factor that in Mike McGlinchey's favor is working 25 solid years of experience.
Oh, God. You're just convinced that he's 40 years old.
He is. Have you not seen the man?
He's not as old as A'Shawn Robinson.
Oh, he is.
He is not as old as A'Shawn.
The two of them were in the same 1979 high school yearbook.
McGlinchey. I'm glad I didn't let you write the profile.
All I'm saying is during the season sometime there was a Notre Dame game on the TV while I was grading some other game, and they were interviewing Mike McGlinchey after the game, and if you told me that man was 38 years old, I would not have batted an eyelid.
Like, why are they interviewing this 15-year veteran?
What is this? Is this some sort of flashback to 1999? What's going on here? He looks old, grizzled.
92 was his freshman year. Then he took a few years off.
He looks older than Andrew Whitworth looks now.
And what's he, 37? Oh, like a legit 37?
Yeah, actually 37.
So he's experienced. Mike McGlinchey bringing a lot of experience to the NFL draft.
Yes.
On the interior, a lot of big names. I mean, Quentin Nelson, everybody loves. We've talked about this quite a bit. Best guard prospect since the best guard of all time, whoever that may be. So he's the best, right? Isaiah Wynn, kicking inside from tackle to guard, most likely from Georgia. Will Hernandez, another potential first-round pick out of UTEP. At center, Frank Ragnow out of Arkansas. Other people have him in the second. We have him potentially in the first. Our highest-graded center for 2 straight years. And there's some depth at guard as well. Guys like Wyatt Teller in the third, Braden Smith out of Auburn. James Daniels, an interesting center prospect for a zone-heavy scheme. So love the interior O-line depth. Austin Corbett, a guy that can move up and down Nevada. Left tackle, might be able to play some guard or center at the next level. I'm not saying this is completely turning the NFL around, but at least it's encouraging to see a bunch of guys that we kind of like coming out in the offensive line, because the NFL needs it.
The NFL does desperately need offensive linemen. I think part of it is there's an adjustment period hitting into the NFL as well, so I don't know how much this class will immediately fix it, but this is definitely the class that we've liked the most since doing this in terms of offensive line depth. There's a few years we've been doing this, and you're like, where are the good linemen?
The first tackle class was hard for us to wrap our heads around with Andres Pete, Cedric Agboye, Jake Fisher, a lot of these guys, and they just weren't that good.
Yeah, you're like, none of these guys are good. Surely, where are the first rounders? Because none of these people look like they should be first rounders. At least now, there's a bunch of guys we're pretty happy with being in the first round.
So that wraps up the offense. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. if you're looking for an edge defender in the first round, I put average as far as what the top end looks like, and then the depth is weak. And this is a year removed from us liking quite a few edge defenders, from Myles Garrett, Derek Barnett, Solomon Thomas. A lot of questions with this edge defender class. Everybody seems to have Bradley Chubb as the slam dunk top option, and I think it's in part because there aren't many question marks other than can he be an elite pass rusher, which I feel is a significant question mark for a top 10 guy.
Pretty major question mark.
Harold Landry from Boston College a year ago at this time should have been the top of the class. Arden Key from LSU would have been right there with him, but they both had injuries and off-field and all these things going on. This edge defender class just comes with too many question marks right now.
This offseason has been a terrible place to be if you need an edge rusher in the NFL.
Yeah.
There was nobody there in free agency, pretty much. There has been nobody there. I mean, this draft doesn't look like a nice place to be either. So if you've desperately needed some guy to come in and immediately repair your dismal pressure total on defense, this is not the year for it. You're going to be waiting until 2019 because the chances are you're not finding one either in free agency or the draft.
Yeah,
I mean, Landry is the only guy that's looked like a legitimate kind of pure speed, athleticism, kind of consistent pressure-bringing edge rusher.
Yeah, and look, in Bradley Chubb, I'm not trying to get to like Josh Allen territories here. I don't want to get to the point where I'm trying to calm people's expectations so much that it sounds like I hate the guy. I just think Chubb is more of just a really good, well-rounded run defender who can rush the passer a little bit. The concept of him maybe going to number 2 to the Giants or even in the top 5, I don't love it. Louis Riddick from ESPN came out and said that he would take Chubb over Myles Garrett. He actually told me that off the record a couple weeks ago. Over in Indy at the Combine, we were discussing this. And so I had a feeling he was going to break that out on TV at some point, too, so I wasn't really that surprised. I did disagree with Lewis at that point, but Myles Garrett's awesome. I think he'll be awesome. He started off great in Cleveland. So I'm just not seeing that. Again, I feel similar to Chubb as how I felt about Solomon Thomas last year. Is he good enough off the edge to warrant top 10? Is he good enough all around and against the run to warrant top 15 to 20? Sure. But he's not. I don't think he's Myles Garrett range.
Yeah, I mean, can he be a top-level pass rusher if you're planning on taking a guy in the top 5 is a serious question mark. I mean, otherwise, there's not a lot of value in a guy who's a good run defender and can bring a little bit of pressure. Like, that's not it's worth having on your roster, but it's not worth committing number 2 overall in the draft and big-time money or whatever. That's not what you're shooting for here. You're shooting for the guy that can bring you consistent, sustained pressure, and if he can, make an impact against the run, that's a bonus.
So we actually have Harold Landry a little bit higher than him, a little bit based off of that potential, but what we saw in his junior year tape, because he was the best edge rusher that particular year out of this class. But the rest of the class is now guys like Marcus Davenport, who's a monster but needs a little bit of polish, Obo Okoronkwo from Oklahoma, where there's a size question mark. Hercules Mataafa, where there's a question mark. How is he actually going to do when he has to move to the edge after playing on the interior at Washington State?
That's a nice back-to-back bit of name pronunciation.
I just rolled right through it, right?
Beautiful.
Make that into a video, Mike. Just me pronouncing names properly for the first time ever.
Yeah.
Kamoko Tarai, Duke Ejiofor. There's crazy names all across this edge defender class. Chad Thomas. There we go. Nailed it. There's a bunch of depth-type players in this edge class. But Josh Sweat, from Florida State, he got a lot of hype just because he was a workout warrior, but he never really rushed the passer consistently at Florida State. So I think there are some questions at edge, and there are some questions at defensive interior. And again, I think if you look at draft classes in a big picture light and you kind of stack them up year over year, I feel like you can kind of see some NFL trends. And the NFL trends the last couple of years were the defenses are getting stronger and stronger and stronger. But now when you're saying, hey, the offensive lines look a little bit better this year, the defensive lines don't look good, maybe we'll get that mess sorted out for offensive linemen over the next couple of years. It'll take a while, though.
Yeah. I don't know how much those are trends. We've had this conversation before about whether this was a trend that more defensive players are going to come into the league. We're seeing this improvement overall, or if we just got a couple of good years on the defensive side and if things will swing back the next couple of years, if it just goes in random cycles of talent that comes out. I suspect it's more random cycles of talent, and we'll see it swing back in the other direction. But this is a better year than the last few for several positions, but it's definitely weak for those edge rushers, and I don't know if it's great for the interior guys either.
Yeah, edge was actually a little off 2 years ago as well. So on the interior, we have Maurice Hurst as a potential top 5 pick, maybe top 10 pick, whatever you want to call it.
Which is way higher than pretty much anybody else.
Still way higher than everyone else. We'll talk about him a little bit. We can talk about him now. Here's the news. He's cleared. Heart issue. Apparently cleared. He worked out at his pro day, had numbers at his pro day at Michigan. I don't know how much he was able to actually train for that, or if he had to stop training since the combine. I don't know what that dynamic is.
That's still going to be a big question mark, in that he was cleared by somebody to take part in a pro day. That doesn't mean the 32 NFL teams' doctors have cleared him.
Right.
Look, and we still have no idea what the thing was in the first place. They just found some kind of abnormality with an EKG, which could be anything. That could be all the way from you have a heart problem that you should stop playing this right now and never pick it up again.
Right.
Or it could be you just had a random heart murmur. That's not going to happen again. You're good. Have fun.
I think I had one of those weird EKGs one time. Then I was fine.
And then you were good. It hasn't stopped you.
That was 10 years ago. Look at me.
Exactly, yeah.
Healthy as a horse.
So, and I suspect you're going to get a spectrum of answers from NFL teams. There are going to be guys that just aren't going to touch that because we've seen, the worst case scenario of that with Gaines Adams a few years ago. Just was sudden death syndrome, just dropped dead from a heart condition that was pre-existing. That's what prompted the kind of EKG screening at the combine in the first place.
Right.
So there are going to be teams, I'm sure, that just take him straight off the board and say, we're not going to run that risk. And there are going to be teams that get the updated medical thing and say, okay, we're fine. We're good. Let's go ahead. I mean, Star Lele was taken in the first round after a similar deal. Some kind of heart abnormality that was picked up on a test, and it turned out to be fine. Nothing.
So my question with Hurst, and we said this last year about Jonathan Allen, I don't think maybe on the interior super athleticism isn't completely necessary as maybe like an edge. With an edge, I really want to see that athleticism confirmation. So when I'm, pounding the table that Myles Garrett is awesome, love to see when that's backed up. On the interior, it'd be good to see. And you had Jonathan Allen last year, not really wow at the combine, but we still went out on a limb and put him at number 2 on our board and all that fun stuff. I feel like Hurst, it would have been nice to see, him crush it from an athleticism standpoint, but you still see the quickness on tape. You see it all play on tape.
Yeah, I don't.
And really, I think he'll be fine.
I don't really care what his numbers were. Like I've said before, that most of the athleticism and the measurables and stuff is thresholds, and as long as you're above, a catastrophic threshold, you're fine. So Orlando Brown basically failed every threshold, and that suddenly became a problem.
He improved at pro day.
He did. But my point is, at that stage, you're like, okay, now that's an issue. We need to start thinking about things.
Right.
As long as you're like anywhere in the viable category, the tape speaks for itself. And the tape from Maurice Hurst is ridiculous. At which point, as long as he's anything north of train wreck when it comes to workouts, you're fine. He still ran like a 4.9, which for a guy, knocking on for 300 pounds is pretty impressive.
Anything north of train wreck. I like it.
That's what I'm shooting for.
So my question with the rest of the interior defensive line class, you've got Vita Vea, big, huge 340-pounder out of Washington, another potential first-round pick. He's rushed the passer well, but there's still kind of that question mark if that translates in the NFL. Beyond that, there's not really a ton of guys that are going to be able to disrupt and get after the quarterback. Maybe Taven Bryan out of Florida, who's very good athlete and had a breakout 2017 season. But then you have guys like Daron Payne out of Alabama, who just kind of that classic Alabama guy that's going to come in, probably play the run really well, and rushing the passer question mark. Harrison Phillips out of Stanford, Tim Settle out of Virginia Tech. Just a lot of questions with a lot of these guys, or they're just projected as these run-first type of guys. So it feels like this class where you'll be able to find some role-playing big guys, but not that dynamic 3-down option, I think, besides Hurst and maybe Vea.
Yeah, this whole class generally seems pretty light in terms of pass rush. There's a few linebackers, actually, that are interesting because they've done a little bit, moonlighted as pass rushers in college. It wouldn't be surprising to see some of these guys given a shot as a pass rusher purely because there are so few pass rushing options in this draft.
Yeah,
and like I said,
either spot along the line. Yep.
Free agency was barren as well. There was nothing in the cupboard in terms of pass rush there. So if you've desperately needed pass rush this entire offseason, you might start looking at some of these guys that did a little bit of it as a linebacker, giving this guy a shot as a sub-package rusher only as a rookie.
Well, let's discuss some of those linebackers. So you've got your traditional linebackers, a guy like Roquan Smith out of Georgia, I think the top of this class, because we've projected 3 potential first-round picks, top of the class, very strong.
Yeah.
Having 3 potential first-round linebackers, Roquan Smith out of Georgia, Tremaine Edmonds out of Virginia Tech, Leighton Vander Esch out of Boise State. Tremaine Edmonds is that guy who's built like an edge rusher at like 6'5", 260, 250, 260, but he's never you don't just turn linebackers into edge rushers unless they've done it before, so he's not going to be a conversion guy. He's a linebacker right now. Rashaan Evans is a guy that started his career essentially as an edge defender at Bama, and then he became more of a traditional linebacker. So he could be that guy that's at least a movable chess piece on the defensive side of the ball. Which other guys do you think? So who else do you like in this linebacker class? I went with certainly strong at the top, but also strong as far as depth goes.
No, I think, and again, this is a bit like the wide receivers in that there's a linebacker for everybody in this class. There's a bunch of guys that are very strong at very specific things. There's not as many guys that are well-rounded, complete players, but you expect that as you go down the draft. If they were complete players that were good at everything, they'd be going in the first round. So, that's not necessarily a problem. But guys like Sky Moore from South Carolina, Dorian O'Daniel from Clemson, those guys have been extremely productive at an extremely high level. Their athleticism didn't necessarily jump off the tape, but actually both those guys tested really well at the combine. And those are interesting guys, as much as I just kind of talked about how measurable numbers are all meaningless, except thresholds.
Depends on the position. Depends on the position.
If you suddenly test an awful lot better than you looked, that's worth going back to the tape and looking at again as well. Why did I think this guy wasn't a great athlete? And does that then translate? Because your initial thought is, well, he's doing all this really good stuff, but that won't work at the NFL where you're trying to do it against better athletes. But if it turns out you're a better athlete than I gave you credit for, it probably does work. That was what I screwed up with Antonio Brown way back in the day. I looked at Antonio Brown's tape, and I was saying, well, he's making these guys look ridiculous at Central Michigan, but there's no way what he's doing, looking that sort of slow and deliberate, works in the NFL where people run 4.3. Turns out it works fine in the NFL at that level, and I probably wasn't giving him enough credit for the kind of athlete and the moves that he was putting on. I think the same kind of thing is true for O'Daniel and Sky Moore. What they're doing is going to work because it turns out they're sufficiently athletic to make that happen. Then you've got guys like Jerome Baker from Ohio State. You've got Malik Jefferson from Texas, guys that look the part, are big-time athletes, haven't necessarily put it all together.
Right.
And you're kind of waiting for that athletic potential to be realized.
I liked Baker quite a bit in 2016. I thought he was going to emerge as one of the top linebackers here because he's like that 225-pound guy that has the athleticism and all that stuff. But, man, some ugly games for that entire Ohio State linebacker core last year.
There were a lot of guys this year who it seems like were a year removed from their best play, which is always strange when you're talking about a draft class. And you expect this kind of linear progression from – okay, good, better, best, and they hit the NFL coming off their best season, and it makes sense. But there's a whole load of guys in this draft class where their best season was a year ago, and you're left trying to work out what happened in 2017. Was it injuries? Did they just take a step back? Was it a change of scheme? What was the problem?
I want to know how much it matters. That's one of those things I've always really wondered, and kind of like one of my next things to ask our analytics team to work on is it as simple as weighing both seasons equally? Does the most recent season mean more? And what have we seen historically with guys who maybe peaked 2 years removed from their first rookie season rather than from the rookie season versus their last year before their rookie season? Some questions that need to be answered there.
It's concerning for me because if it's all a linear progression, you carry it forward in your head. You say he's getting better, better, better. In the NFL, he just gets better, better, better. And we have a star on our hands. Whereas if you've already seen him start going down, you don't know you wonder where the ceiling is. Maybe he already reached the ceiling and he's heading backwards. Or, that's as good as he can get.
Because that's 21?
Well,
never want that.
Maybe that's as good as he can get because he already struggled to live up to that performance. Whereas if, you got better than the previous year, you at least, in theory, you can still get better. You're only trending in the right direction.
Some other interesting guys, Jack Sitchie out of Wisconsin, your boy Shaq Griffin. So a lot of linebackers and guys that can move around. I know what you're going to say about Shaq, and I'll let you say it. Do it again.
Well, I'm getting back to where we were going with this. These guys that can rush the passer. So you've got Shaq Griffin who can rush the passer. You've got Gennard Avery who can rush the passer. Memphis, Avery?
Yeah.
These are guys that have done extensive work rushing the passer at the college level, but are seen as linebackers typically in the NFL. Maybe these guys, when they wouldn't in previous seasons, are going to get a shot to rush the passer because there are no pass rushers out there.
By the way, can we just give full disclosure on how you approach this process versus me? I mean, so the fact that I follow college football a little bit more than you do. Now you have to
give me a list of people to look at.
So, but you have to like grade the games every now and again or whatever. But I like get in the trenches as far as knowing who's who.
Yes.
And then then I do my draft work. When you do your draft work, it's like which is great too because it's like clean slate.
Yeah.
And it's like Steve told me to watch this guy. And I watched him, and sometimes you'll just send me a message, which is like, "Man, that number 51 on the blue team is really good." And I'm like, "Who did I tell you? Who is it? Oh, it's Avery from." You got to connect the dots. Oh, the little guy from the red team. Oh, Hines on NC State.
I gave you the college. I don't say the red team. Give me some credit here. I might give you the number.
Don't ruin my story.
I might give you the number and describe him, as a midget. But I'm at least going to tell you that he plays at Louisiana Tech.
So the midget on NC State was the text I got. Really like the midget on NC State.
There you go.
The other day.
It's fun because it kind of goes both ways. There'll be times where I'm watching it. I'm like, I really like this guy. No idea who he is, but really like him. And there are other times where I'm watching, I'm like, why am I watching this guy? This guy is terrible. There is no possible way that he's worth a draft pick from anybody. And yet I'm watching him. Most of the time when that happens, it's because he's a 6'2" corner that you're making me watch.
Yeah, so there's a lot of 6'2" corners that I just said, look, the NFL's going to like them. They're going to at least be looking at them, so we have to look at them too, even though the guy's like a 52 grade.
Yeah.
We might have to keep an eye on him. All right, that's your linebacker core class. Let's go to corner. One that I called pretty strong at the top, and then depth is not great, especially compared to last season. Last season, I kept making the statement that there was about 20 corners that I felt pretty good about, like maybe as high as second rounders. So thinking that the NFL would still be able to get starting corners in the fourth round because they were just going to naturally drop. Not seeing that with this class. I think the three potential first-round picks, I'm keeping Minkah Fitzpatrick from Alabama, slotted as a corner. There's Josh Jackson out of Iowa. There's Denzel Ward out of Ohio State. Feel pretty good about those guys in the first. Mm-hmm. And then what we have here is just a ton of guys stacked up as second-round picks who I think, knowing you wouldn't care about some of them maybe jumping up into the first if you had to, but it's a pretty good group of second-round corners that we're looking at here.
Yeah, and all these second-round guys have some kind of, I don't want to say critical flaw because that suggests that that's, a terminal problem that is insurmountable, but each one of these guys has some pause for concern. There's something about their game that makes you worry, whether it's Jair Alexander, who missed most of 2017, is a little bit on the small side, and you kind of question whether he's got the full top-end speed, whether it's Isaiah Oliver, who's got some issues in kind of tight quarters, moving that long body that the NFL loves so much. There's a few different concerns. Guys at small schools, all this kind of thing. Each one of these guys got something about him that just makes you wonder, which is what's keeping him out of the first round. But any one of those guys, I think, could potentially end up as a pretty good starter.
Yeah, so I think there's average depth, but I like the first couple rounds of guys at least on our board as far as the cornerbacks go, and then safety top end. It's weak only because I think there's only one guy.
It's Derwin and everybody else.
It's Derwin James, and then another class where it's like pick what you need. We've got split field safeties like Quinn Blanding, a guy he's not going to be your Earl Thomas free safety, the guy who might be able to fill a free safety role. Damon Webb out of Ohio State. I feel like he's that guy that is kind of a free safety slot hybrid. Marcus Allen, your box safety. You just have different style players, but a bunch of guys that are, potential starters, but probably best not picking them until maybe the third round.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of these guys as well that, like we said before, have that matchup versatility kind of role.
Yes.
Guys like MJ Stewart, Chris Weatherspoon. There's a few guys here.
Weatherspoon's one of our guys.
One of our guys.
Well, yeah, I don't think too many people are on him.
Oh, good. Well, that'll work out.
Out of
nicely.
Troy.
Yeah.
A guy that a couple years of good grading for us, played some corner, some slot, and some safety.
Fitting into that story about how I watch these guys without having any idea who they are, go in to Chris Weatherspoon. I'm like, finally, a 6'2" corner that isn't bad.
Because
the first one.
He was listed as a corner for us because that's where he played most of his snaps.
Yeah, most of his time this year covering the slot. So I go in there to watch my latest 6'2" corner, First couple of plays,
cussing me out because you know he's going to be bad.
First couple of plays, I see him make a great read in zone coverage, find work in behind him, make a play or break on a dig route, kind of like we said Marcus Peters does, though for slightly different reasons. I'm like, ooh, that's nice. Makes a few nice more plays in zone, does some nice stuff. I'm like, finally a 6'2" corner that I don't hate. And then it turned out pretty quickly after that, actually, he's a safety.
So there you go.
He's a safety who can just cover the slot. So I'm still searching for the 6'2" corner that I don't hate.
And that's really useful in the NFL. The guy that can cover the slot, play some safety and all that stuff. So,
yeah, I mean, he becomes that coverage weapon, a guy that can cover tight ends when they're split out wide and otherwise just man your safety position.
Check out the NFL Draft Guide for more, especially on the safeties. If you're interested in safeties, the specifics, I wrote it up in every write-up where these guys win, where they're best fit. Even one guy who I put negatives for probably 20 things, and then I was like, but he can cover tight ends. He'll carve out that role for himself in the NFL. I really wanted to like him as well.
Tight end cover.
It could be a role in the NFL.
Well, it would be when you went up against Gronk. That's basically all Sean Davis did for the Steelers.
Badly. Gronk killer, in parentheses. Killer.
Yeah.
All right, so there you have it. There are our positions of strength and weakness heading into the draft. Let's just run through some draft news, and then maybe really quickly players we're really high and low
Pro days
this week. Pro days were this week for quarterbacks. What do you make of them, Sam?
Well, I think you had the best way of evaluating the pro days, which was the headwear for each of the various quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield obviously went with the headband because he's that kind of badass. Sam Darnold went with the straight-lace, forward-facing baseball cap.
Right, like I'm all business here. You know, I'm CEO style.
This is how you are supposed to wear this.
Right.
That was how he rocked it.
Right.
Josh Allen, there was nothing.
I feel like he completely adjusted because he's like, I don't want people making fun of me like they did Baker. I'm not as straight-laced as Sam Darnold. I'm a little wild. But I'm also, because, I mean, if Lamar Jackson comes out and puts on a backwards cap, the NFL and Twitter are going to break. I just hope he doesn't do that for his sake. I feel like he's going to go no hat.
It felt like Josh Allen was kind of going to go, look, I'm a raw quarterback here. What is more raw than no headwear whatsoever? There's no cap. There's no headband. This is what you get. What you see is what you get. And at the moment,
I'm still learning.
It's unkempt hair.
Like, I don't know if I'm headband guy or a hat guy yet because I'm moldable clay.
You take me, and I will put on whatever headwear you assign to me.
And if
one of you
sends me draftjoshallen.com again, you're all getting blocked. I know that they're trying to push it. I know PFT and Big Cat are trying to push him. And I get it. I know they're big fans. They like his hands and his cannon and all that stuff. But I don't need you guys shoving that down my throat. But I think that's the best way of saying it, right? No hat because I have upside.
Yeah.
I'm moldable clay.
The choice of headwear will be yours. I am prepared to roll up to your facility and put whatever you want on my head. You just tell me what to put on there.
What would you say about a prospect that rolled in with that big Russian hat that you wear that keeps your ears all warm when it's freezing?
Where they were doing the pro day. If they were doing the pro day with 5 inches of snow on the outside, you know, the winter storm warnings that my phone has been getting inundated with over the past week, if it was like, you know, -10 wind chill, snow flurries, wind howling in off the Urals.
Then you write down prepares for the elements.
Exactly. Then you're fine to wear the Russian bear hat, maybe even deploying the side flaps to really, you know, insulate the head.
Well, you pretty much get those for the side flaps, right? My ears were freezing that one day. You were so warm when we were walking in the 0-degree weather.
Yeah, I mean, there's degrees. If it's cold, you know, the flaps can be up and you just wear the big warm hat. And then when it gets really freaking cold, that's when you deploy the flaps and, you know, say, forget it. I'm good.
So Sam Darnold worked out in the rain. Everybody was so excited to see him throw in the rain, which was great. Josh Allen works out and throws 175 yards. I can't believe we're even talking about some of this stuff. I mean, people in the NFL flew to Wyoming just to confirm that Josh Allen throws really fast.
So there was one he uncorked that probably went 75 yards. It went a long way in the air, but it was 5 yards behind the receiver who had to basically stop and wait for it to arrive out of the sky. Is that a plus or a minus? You airmailed the thing 75 yards down the field, but it was 5 yards behind the guy that was running downfield to catch it.
It's neither because it doesn't matter.
Not to us. to the guy in the building who's watching this guy play, watching his pro day.
It's a plus.
It's a plus just because he threw it 75 yards?
Correct. Just because he threw it 75 yards. Allen, it was interesting watching him because it did look like, he could throw these bullets. It did look like he was really trying to take something off. It looked like I tweeted out, it looks like a pitcher who could throw 104 but was trying to dial it down, which is actually tough to do.
There was an extensive period of that pro day that was dedicated to basically routine, some may say pointless throws.
Hey, look, I can check down.
Yeah, that you expect me to be able to make.
Pro days are fun. It boggles my mind in general that scouts, I cannot find something that is more self-centered in scouting than focusing on the day that you were there. Is there anything more self-centered than that? I was there when he threw for 500 yards. Therefore, I'm going to make a conclusion based off 8% of his games because I was there for that one.
Well, definitely if the logic is because I was in the building, this was somehow more important.
Right. I'm not talking about, I understand why people go to see prospects. If I was going to draft a quarterback, and let me say, when I'm a GM again, speaking confidently, when I'm a GM, I'll go watch the quarterbacks that I want to draft.
Twitter bitch.
Yes, you'll be my Twitter bitch.
Yeah.
I'll go watch I'll bring you. We'll go watch the quarterbacks that we want to draft.
That's nice. As long as I bring the Twitter with me.
So I'm not saying don't go to these things. I understand why they go there. You do want to see them in person and talk to them, see how they interact. I'm fine with all that stuff. But if you ever weigh a performance because you were there, you're self-centered, it's ridiculous, and it's the most irrelevant data point that you could come up with.
What I think is scary is that I think a lot of the times it's being given weight because it's like one of the few games of this person that they've even gone through. So it's like I saw this game back in 2016. It was the only game I watched of him back in 2016, but I saw that one where he was fantastic. Therefore, that's great. Whereas, ideally you want to be saying, well, I saw all of his 2017 games and all of his 2016 games. Therefore, I have a reasonably complete picture. I think a lot of when you hear these things, when I was at blah, blah, and I saw him throw for 400 yards in the snow, it's because that was the first time I saw him that year, and it was pretty good. That was like my entire season in college football. I just went through game after game, watching one of these guys for a game, being like, yep, I'm done.
This is like, let's say you're dating a girl, and you're like, you know what, I need to date a girl. I need at least 15 dates before I decide if I'm going to marry her or not, but I'm just going to pick 4. We're just going to pick 4. All I need is 4. We'll forget about what could have potentially happened in the other 11. All I need is 4, even though you'd probably have a better sample if you had 15.
Yeah.
Is that a good analogy, or is that completely made up and stupid?
Pretty stretched. Pretty thin. I'm just saying, I think it's possibly even scarier than the scenario you're painting, which is I think a lot of these, the times you see that referenced is because it's basically the only game of that person that they saw in that particular time period.
So, yeah, we love pro days.
Oh, yeah.
They're very important. We discussed Maurice Hurst. Let me cross that off as news to hit.
Done.
2 more things before we wrap it up. I wrote a piece this week on Lamar Jackson, but you wrote one on Saquon Barkley and his strengths and weaknesses. Give a quick summation of what you've seen from Barkley and what you wrote in that piece, because I thought it was a very fair piece for a guy that the NFL is calling
the greatest prospect in the last 20 years at the position, or the perfect NFL running back prospect.
It's like the 5th generational running back of the last 5 years.
One team apparently has given Saquon Barkley a perfect grade at the position, which means that one team is out of their goddamn minds because
at least one team.
There's just no way you can watch that guy's tape and say, there are no flaws here, nothing. Everything he does is good.
Yeah.
Because that isn't the case, right? Now, the question is, he has one fairly significant flaw, and the only question that you need to concern yourself with is how big a problem is this? Now, his flaw is that he's a home run hitter, and a home run hitter is constantly looking for that home run to the point where they
won't take a single.
What was it you were telling me they did?
They strike out a lot.
Strike out a lot. There you go.
I used what you said in the, yeah.
No, I know. You used the one I did, but I was looking for your baseball.
But they strike out a lot.
So a home run hitter strikes out a lot, and that's what happens to Saquon Barkley. There are a bunch of plays where he gets towards the line of scrimmage, it's getting cluttered, the hole is squeezing, and instead of attacking that and getting 3 yards, he goes, hell no, that's squeezing. I'm going to go looking for 25 elsewhere. And he'll, reverse field. He'll circle back in the backfield and get himself tackled for 6-yard loss. That happens too much. But the question is, how big an issue is that? Now, some of it is definitely schematic. It's the problem of the guys in front of him. It's a problem of the fact that everybody's keying on Saquon Barkley. And there's a ton of numbers we pulled out to back that up. He was hit on average, when he was hit at or behind the line of scrimmage, he was hit on average 2 yards deep in the backfield, which was the highest or the furthest into the backfield of any running back on those runs. So that's a schematic issue as well. There's a bunch of plays where you look on tape and he's getting the ball at the handoff and there's a guy like there. He's just got no shot. But there's also a lot of plays, and you don't need to go far, where you see him just bail on a perfectly legitimate play. There's 3 yards to be had, and he doesn't want it.
You highlighted a bunch of those on Twitter. They're all a part of the article. The funny thing about this is, so that's Barkley, his skill set, and we're not trashing him.
But that's his negative as a runner, right? The positive is that he is capable of taking any one of those plays to the house, and that makes him a valuable big play threat.
Right.
And as a receiver, he's devastating because he's a 233-pound guy that runs a 4.4 flat, and you don't have a linebacker that can do that. Right. So if you get him split out as a linebacker, he will make you look ridiculous. And in a league where passing has never been more important, that makes him more valuable than a Ronald Jones, say, who is a better pure ball carrier, but is at best an unknown quantity as a receiver. At worst, looks like a pretty ropey receiver.
The funny thing about Barkley as a runner versus all the guys after him, from Ronald Jones to Saquon Barkley to Nick Chubb, the thing we always say about those guys is they seem to maximize their run blocking, either taking what's there or get those extra 2 upon contact and, fall forward and all that stuff. Barkley's kind of the opposite. I'm looking at Todd Gurley's career right here, and now this is where I'm saying I wouldn't be surprised to see something like this.
Yeah.
Year 1, 4.8 yards per carry, and most of that was like he led the league in breakaway percentage, meaning the biggest chunk of his runs came on those 15-plus yardage came on 15-plus yard runs. Get all that?
Sort of.
Year 2, 3.2 yards per carry. We were talking about vision problems, won't take what's there, all this stuff. Last year, MVP caliber type season, 4.7 yards per attempt again. So we're talking about this kind of like roller coaster to Gurley's career that's very dependent on scheme and the offensive line. So when Barkley gets that good blocking, home run threat. If he doesn't, when you put him in the same system as, say, a Nick Chubb's going to find a way to maybe get 3 or 4. Barkley might be -1, -2.
Yeah.
So that's the difference that we're looking at. And then receiving ability, like you said, dynamic, and if he's used properly, used as a mismatch weapon, he'll be valuable no matter what. It's just a matter of, is that total package truly there for Barkley for a perfect prospect?
Yeah, and you have to, like when I said that a lot of the negatives are scheme, some of them are him, you have to figure out what the percentages are there. And, when you give him a better scheme and a better offensive line potentially in front of him, how much of those negatives do you take away? What are you left with? Because that was always Barry Sanders' thing, that he with the most negative yardage in NFL history on his way to making 15,000 career yards or whatever it was. So it's not always a bad thing. It's a case of you just need to work out how bad that is. And like I say, in a league where passing has never been more important, it's less of a problem than it would have been 10 years ago. So it is this ridiculously small needle to try and thread of explaining that he is clearly a flawed prospect. He is not the perfect running back prospect, whatever some NFL team thinks. But he's still really damn good and should go in the top 10 somewhere because he's potentially a devastating weapon. I'm
going to transition to Lamar Jackson because the phrase I keep using over a lot of prospects here is you at least have to know what you're getting. You have to understand. That's the same thing with Barkley.
Yeah.
It's like you just understand what you're getting into. That's been my point on Lamar Jackson. I wrote him up this week, and there's a lot of throws on tape that make me really cringe with Lamar, that make me, if I'm the GM, maybe I'm not the guy to do it. Like, I don't know if I would put my job on the line for Lamar Jackson. I do worry a little bit about that, but I don't question any GM that takes him in the first round and says, all right, we're going to build around him. We're going to do it. There is an offense to be built around Lamar Jackson. That's how I position the whole piece. Know his strengths, know his limitations, but build around him. And the important thing is, it sounds stupid and, self-evident and obvious that of course you're going to have a plan for a guy like this, but we've seen, even in relatively recent history with Tavon Austin, teams will take a guy with no earthly idea what they're going to do with him. Right.
And if you don't have that idea, you end up wasting a guy that could be a potentially dangerous weapon for you. And it's the same with a guy like Lamar Jackson. You need to have an idea of what you're going to do with him. You can't just be taking him because we need a quarterback and he is the only quarterback available at this spot. Therefore, we are taking Lamar Jackson.
Right.
So what does this offense look like, the offense that you build around Lamar Jackson.
Well, let's discuss his strengths and weaknesses real quick.
Yeah, okay.
I think he's capable of making great NFL throws, tight window throws, could throw a touch. He doesn't have a Michael Vick cannon, but I've used Vick as a comp because of some of these strengths and weaknesses. So he can make special NFL throws. He's going to miss a ton of throws. And even the throws that he hits, they're going to be back shoulder instead of front. If you guys have our QB annual with the accuracy charting and all that stuff, the new update there, he's not great when it comes to just pure accuracy and that stuff. So he's not going to be this efficient, 10, 15 play drive guy, short passing game. But he's got the big plays in his bag, inefficient as a passer, special runner. And you have to tap into that special running.
Yeah.
And the running that he did at Louisville was not what people say. It was not just he drops back, runs around in circles like it's Madden, and then takes off. Like I posted last week, that was only 20%, 27% of his rushing yards. A lot of it was the design run game. And I know that's dangerous in the NFL, but I think quarterbacks get hurt when they're bad at taking care of themselves. Michael Vick got hurt, and Robert Griffin III got hurt, and other guys get hurt when they're bad at sliding and knowing when to take hits. There are other guys like Russell Wilson, Colin Kaepernick, I think was really good at this. They knew when to accelerate enough to get out of bounds, knew when to slide, knew where defenders were coming from. I feel like Lamar is closer to those guys than he is to Vick or RG3. So slight frame, yes, maybe. I think he can protect himself. You have to use him in the design run game at least a little bit.
I agree with that part. What would concern me a little bit is that I think different to Vic, whereas Vic was all about being a freakier athlete than you are. And he would dance around like Barry Sanders or like D'Angelo Hall or one of these guys that's just like a joystick, and he would just beat you with agility and speed. Lamar Jackson is a little bit more power and hard cut and burst through an arm tackle, which is fine and it's good, but the problem is you're inherently exposing yourself to more of a hit, and if you mistime that a little bit, you're getting clocked as opposed to just beating a guy for agility. So I don't know if he's capable of getting away with that in addition to understanding when you're going to get nailed and hitting the deck.
I hear you.
So the guy, the master at all this is Russell Wilson, who basically never takes a big shot with all this stuff. He gets when he runs into the open field, he will get exactly what's there, and then he'll hit the dirt. And at times, he'll do exactly what we're talking about. He'll make a hard cut. He'll make a guy look ridiculous, knowing he can do that. And then when the next guy comes along, that's when he slides and it's done. I don't know if you were going to be able to get – I don't know. He may be able to do that and play like Russell Wilson and beat the first guy, go through his arm tackle, and then slide with the second guy. Or maybe that's just always going to be his instinct that I can run through these arm tackles, and that's what's going to do him eventually, is that there's going to be one where he misses it and he gets a full-on shot, and that's what's going to put him down.
So I think you have to use him at least a little bit as a runner. Hope that you can protect him a little bit. And what that does, much like at Louisville, opens up easier throws. So when you do have to defend the run play action off that, and you have to worry about both guys being the runners, it opens up easier throws. And at Louisville, he had, out of the 6 top quarterbacks, had the highest percentage of open throws out of all those guys. So a lot of that, I think, is because of his run threat. So when he has easier throws, even though he's not pinpoint, he's at least going to complete them more often than not. So now you're creating easy yards. You've got the big yards from his arm, and you hopefully have some big arms from his legs. So there's something in there. It's just not always going to look pretty. It's not going to be. It's not going to look like Breeze and Brady and Rodgers and the top guys. And that's just what you have to wrap your head around.
Yeah, I mean it's a similar kind of story to what you need to do with Cam Newton. You need to take advantage of his rushing threat because it's such a huge part of him. You're going to have to accept that there's going to be a low percentage. There's a low efficiency percentage to a guy like Cam Newton because he's just not the most accurate quarterback in the world. But he can make devastating plays down the field. He can make those big rushing plays, and overall, he can be an MVP candidate quarterback.
That's another good point too. We've seen, before we wrap it up, we've seen quarterbacks who are on the inaccurate side of the league have success at the NFL level. Even Deshaun Watson last year, very low at all of our accuracy metrics, but if you're accurate in the right places or you have some running ability, you have some other ways to make it up, you're making good decisions, you can make up for it. So we can make up for Lamar's deficiencies is the basic point of the piece.
Yep.
All right, we'll save our some of the favorites. We'll save them for next week. All right, just give me a name. Guy you're high on that you watched this week. Give me a guy.
Tulane running back Dontrell Hilliard. He was a guy who kept jumping off the tape when I was looking at other people at random, to the point where I went, no, let's give this guy his own little look. Went back, looked at him, made some fantastic plays. I actually tweeted a couple of them yesterday, so You can quickly scan my Twitter for the GIFs, and you'll see some pretty impressive Hilliard moves.
I love this guy from Tulane, Sam kept. No, this is the guy. You actually knew his name, which was great.
Well, no, I learned his name. I didn't know his name until I decided I liked this guy. Then I decided it was worth finding out what his name was.
You did learn his name. J.R. Alexander, you mentioned him earlier, a guy I just kind of rewatched a little bit. His 2016 tape is spectacular. 2017 banged up a little bit. His question mark, like you said, with a lot of the corners, there's always like one thing: is it speed? Is it lateral? His is maybe facing bigger receivers, but I'm always a big fan of those guys that I think can cover a good route runner, can cover the Antonio Browns, or at least hang with them, can cover the Julian Edelmans. That's a valuable role in the NFL too. You don't need to be 6 feet, 6'1", 6'2". So I like J.R. in that mold, and just kind of reaffirmed my like for him this week. So
like it.
That was my guy that I was high on this week. All right, guys, that'll do it for us today. We'll have a couple more episodes for you guys next week, NFL-centric, draft-centric. Hit us up at PFF_Sam. I'm at PFF_Steve, and go get yourself an Edge or Elite. Enjoy the draft guide and the QB annual update. We'll talk to you guys again next week.